and I'd love to formally welcome you all to today's conversation. Assurity is excited to be able to present a conversation with Al Shalloway today. Al, in his business success engineering, has been at the forefront of the thinking and the execution of best practice deployment methodologies over many years, and we're really excited that Al is able to join us from Seattle today. So today will be a facilitated conversation between Al and Gareth Holebrook, our principal consultant for Assurity Consulting based here in New Zealand. Al and Gareth will be giving you some valuable insights around how to ensure your strategy, which is generally defined by the exec and senior leadership, is easily translatable into actual work that can be delivered by the people in the line. And I'm sure we've all had examples where we want to make sure there is an absolute connection between what's happening at the top end of the leadership and into the line with the people. And too often, as I've experienced personally, that's not consistently occurring across our businesses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shortly hand across to Gareth to introduce himself and to formally introduce Al, and Gareth can do it a lot more justice than I can do it. But before we do, a bit of housekeeping items, and these are the standard Zoom T's and C's you all know so well after living through a pandemic in the last couple of years. First of all, we're recording the session. No surprises there. We'll send out a link afterwards to you so you can share it or you can review it. And for those that aren't able to make it today, we've got a big turnout today as well. All things Zoom, just please keep your mics off. I know we've had a conversation at the start. There will be points for discussion throughout the conversation today. So there'll be a couple of points to ask some questions. And also, if you want to ask some questions along the way, there's a Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom screen where you can click and ask questions, and Horia will be monitoring that throughout the session. And if he feels he needs to jump in and interrupt Al and Gareth to get a bit more clarity around some points, he will do so. You can also choose to be anonymous with the way you ask questions in there as well. So without further ado, that's enough from me. I'll hand across to Gareth to get us underway.
Thank you, Brendan. And thank you everybody for coming here today. The main problem that I see, and I've seen for a few years at companies, is everybody's there is working really hard and making really rational decisions based on what they can see. But a main source of frustration I've seen is that the strategists who understand the strategy deeply try and articulate it to the people executing on that strategy and can't understand why there's a loss in translation. Also, the people delivering the work don't fully understand how that strategy is being created and feel frustrated that it appears to be either arbitrary or rapidly changing. Similarly, the executive and the leadership team don't have full awareness and transparency of how the work is going. So it seems that we don't have an awareness of the entire value stream. So this is something we're going to explore today, both Al and I. I started working with Al Shalloway just over 18 months ago, when I was collaborating on the value stream consultants training with the Project Management Institute. At the time, he was the director of thought leadership there. So Horia and I and our friends at Navavi have been working with Al for 18 months. And I have to say, not only have I learned an enormous amount from Al over that time, but I've also discovered there's a lot more that I don't know and I'm still learning. And so this is a never-ending journey for me. So really for today, Al, you have a specific set of slides that you're going to talk to, and I'll have a few questions that I'll ask at the end. But it's over to you to talk to us about this main problem we've got, about how we can make our strategy work. Over to you, Al.
Okay, well, thanks, Gareth. Yeah, and believe me, as I learn things, I think I learned 2 things I need to learn for every 1 thing I do learn. So it's really never ending. It's funny, I was with my grandkids this morning early. I babysit a couple days a week, and my youngest was very mesmerized by the Zoom meeting I had for a workshop I was taking there. And I said, well, I'm still learning. It's school for me here. And I think that's still the way it is. I've never stopped. And I think that's important. So this is about making strategy work. And in some ways, I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but this is not theoretical. It may be a little abstract. So you need to ask questions to get it to be a little less abstract. But I think what's really required for your strategy to work is to have some shifts in thinking. And I'm going to present some of that. Here's a little bit about me, and I'm not going to talk about it too much. The reason I put up the books I've co-written is And that's not in any particular order. Actually, Design Patterns Explained was the first book I wrote. I have a very strong tech background. In fact, for 30 years, that was primarily what I did. And I wrote a book about a technical book called Design Patterns, Elements of Reusable Object-Oriented Software that was really brilliant, but kind of impenetrable. So I wrote a book to explain what they wrote, and it presented a different kind of thinking. And then from there, you can see I've done stuff with Scrum. Leanbon was an attempt at one point of us integrating Lean and Kanban together, but whatever, I've got a varied background, and I've formed a new company, Success Engineering, which is taking some of these ideas. So the first thing is, whenever you start an endeavor, and it seems obvious, but it often is forgotten, is you got to ask yourself, what are you going to accomplish? What's the goal? What would success mean? Okay. I've gotten this from Tom Gill. He's big on this. Tom sometimes called the grandfather of Agile. And it's like, well, what would success mean? How do we know we're succeeding? So I wanted to lay out a couple of things I have looked at, but you could add in the chat some other things. You know, to me, it's like quick value delivery of the right products and services. Now, sometimes I might just say products, just add and services if that's what you're doing. You know, value to customers, you know, respond to the market, the efficient implementation and delivery, to be aware of, manage, and mitigate risks, and have predictability of value delivery. Now, I'm not saying this is what your success should be. You need to figure this out and talk amongst yourselves. And as obvious as it may sound, most companies don't do this. In fact, one of the reasons we call our company Success Engineering is because we view success at 4 levels. Not all companies will do this, which is success by adding value to the customer, add value to your employees, add value to the company, and even add value to society. And where do you all stand? So this is a conversation to have as a group. There's not a right answer, but we do use this to define what we call business agility, the ability for an organization to deliver value sustainably, quickly, you know, predictably, high quality, and it needs to be consumed. This is the thing. We talk about delivering value, but delivering value, it's no value unless it's consumed. There used to be a phrase we called shelfware, where that was when a DVD or a CD or a diskette was bought and it was placed on the shelf and never got on the computer. Now everything's downloaded. So cloudware, maybe we call it, meaning somebody put it up there, but nobody's using it. Well, there's no value to that. So we have to start attending to, it's when it's consumed, not merely goes out the door. This is an extension of the idea. It's not when its code is written, not just when its code is written and tested, not just when it's been deployed to ops, not just when ops puts it out and deploys it. It's when does it get used? This gives us this holistic view. Now, I want to look at something that I've called the inherent problem. And it's not inherent like the thing you have to work on directly, but this is something that if your organization is in a hierarchy where you have like a CEO and directors and things like that, you tend to have silos. And the problem is that top-down thinking or bottom-up thinking, in my mind, is old school. You know, it's, oh, should we go bottom up, top down? See, then we're thinking in hierarchies. We want to get out of the whole hierarchy thought process. What we want to do is start noticing that our work is going from here to the customer through different parts of the organization and back. And what happens very often is these are organized as silos. Oh, sorry, I should have just put, there we go. These are organized as silos very often, and each one is optimizing their work. So like maybe marketing is optimizing their work. These guys are optimizing their work, et cetera. This leads to sub-optimization of the whole almost all the time. We got to look at the entire system. This is one of the big shifts. So if we're talking about strategies getting into development and out to the customer, we have to look at all that and all the ways things interact. And it's important. This is just a great quote by Edwards Deming. He's the guy who's basically credited with providing the Japanese, you know, what shifted them in their quality and what we to quality. And it's like a system must be managed. It won't manage itself. These silos are not going to manage themselves. Left to themselves, components, or I could put silos here, become selfish, independent profit centers and thus destroy the system. The secret is cooperation between the components toward the aim of the organization. And now reflect for a few seconds where this happens in your organization. This is natural. So it's not like people are bad when they do this. They're usually rewarded for doing this. So this is one of the big shifts. We have to look at things more holistically, because there's another problem, which is the work waits in the queues between the silos. And these delays literally create additional work, okay? And this is a quote from Don Reinertson: in product development, our greatest waste is not unproductive engineers, but work products sitting idle in process queues. And the reason is, as it sits there, several things happen. If it's requirements, they age. If it's product that could be delivered, then it's not being delivered. It's just waiting there. But worse is errors are detected in one place and then not, or errors are made rather in one place and not detected until later. So what you have is this festering of problems and basically additional work. The more there's delay, the more work you need. This is a very big insight, and it's not attended to enough. So what we want to do is not so much manage the fast work we're trying to do in the workspaces, but eliminate the delays between the workspaces. Okay, that's a basic lean concept and flow concept. So, but we want to talk about strategies here. So basically, strategies, what we want to look at is we've got a vision, and there's both a market vision and an internal vision. In other words, we need to look both at, remember the two values I talked about is to the customer and also to our internal employees. And we're doing this so the company will thrive. And so, we'll also hopefully have a vision of improving society, but that's really the company's choice. We want to decide on what's important. We want to manifest this vision in line with our values. One of the first things we talk about is we should look at what we call the investment pillars. This is a concept. It's maybe a new term for an old concept, but we came up with this at Net Objectives 15 years ago, which is a predecessor company to all this. And investment pillars are, in a sense, what we're wanting to invest in to achieve our vision. And I've given two different examples here. One was for a financial services company. These are actually real ones based on a real client. I'm just not saying who it was. They were a company that you would put your money in and invest. And their number one thing was retain assets, because they made money on how much assets. So anything that helped retain assets, that's good. We'd invest in that. We wanted to improve the customer experience because we didn't want to lose customers. And if we had a bad customer experience, that wouldn't be a good thing. We needed to reduce costs because that would improve our margins. We needed, of course, to be compliant with government regulations, and we wanted to reduce risk. That's a for-profit example. That's not your company. You have to figure out what your 5 are. Or it could be 4, could be 6. There's no point in having more than 6, basically. And not for profit, this was a company I was just thinking of a church I've contributed to, Union Gospel in Seattle, and this is how they did it. How many meals were served, how many beds were provided, et cetera. And there's not a right answer. My experience is, this is unscientific, anecdotal experience perhaps, but is that very often the executives know what these are, but nobody else does. So this is kind of a problem. And we need to kind of have a way to convey this, because basically this vision, this is right up here, basically what I was just showing you, creates the context for our products and services. MVPs, you're probably familiar with, minimum viable product, when you're discovering if you have a new product. If you already have a product and you're enhancing it, I'm not going to go into it today, it might be worth another seminar, is what we call minimum business increments. These are like, I've got an existing product or service, and what's the next increment of value I could deliver and have consumed? It's different than an MVP, because in an MVP, you're investing in whether or not you have a product or services. With an MBI, you're investing in enhancing something that's there. And the difference is, in MVPs, you typically also have small teams that are going to do it. And in MBIs, it's more complicated, because if you're large organizations, you have many teams that may contribute. You got to go through ops probably more. There's more marketing because there's not the close contact you have in an MVP. So an MBI is a little bit bigger. How do I take a chunk of this? Not a little bit bigger. It's really want to be the smallest increment I could get out the door and get value, but it has to contain more information, like the marketing documentation, more what you do to a finished or, a polished product, whereas an MVP might be a little different. And then you get it out. How do you get it to marketing, DevOps, which also could be different. MVPs sometimes go through the standard way, and sometimes they do it in their own way, the cloud or whatever. So now we want to notice that all this work, the initiatives, the increments we're building, and the marketing are all in the context. So we need to make this very clear. One of the agreements we want to make is, don't work on something unless you understand how it manifests the vision. And we use small pieces because small pieces will wait. They're easier to manage and they wait less than these queues we talked about. Smaller pieces will go through the system faster. In fact, I didn't have this quote up here, but I'll just mention it's one of my favorite by Ellie Goldratt. He's the one who wrote The Goal and Theory Constraints. And one of my favorite quotes of his is that sometimes working in small batches is all it takes to bring a system back into control. So this is where we have this big market vision, we have these initiatives, but we want to be working on these small chunks. Work on it, start it, get it done, get feedback. That lowers risk as well of things. Okay. So now you'll see I've got, I'm just going this next level down. Now what we have is just to look at this from a value stream. So I showed those silos. We want to think about it that executives and leadership are giving things to portfolio management, giving things to development, giving things that go out the door. And the feedback is, that's why it's 2 arrows. They give it to them. But there's this kind of like, vision that has to cut across. So it's the executive and leadership's responsibility to make this vision of what's going across the whole organization. People need to see this. So this means you need to create, your tools. Very often your tools don't allow for this. Like Jira is not to knock Jira, but Jira is a tool used a lot by development, but it's all about their pieces. They never see what's going on in this early stage. So you have to create this visibility. And the executive and leadership is responsible for seeing that happens. But you know what? Everybody else has the responsibility to see that we can do this. And very often they don't. In other words, if one of the agreements that we like to make is to get everybody, literally everybody in the room or several rooms different times, and say one of the agreements you're going to make is you're going to work on those things that add value according to what success means in the organization. And it's funny to watch this happen because admittedly, sometimes people just say, yeah, because it's hard to say no. But once you get that in place, at least stated by leadership and executives, then you resolve a lot of conflicts because you're saying, look, our agreement is this is what it means to be successful. We've agreed to work on those things that mean successful. Many often the politics in an organization happens because there's no such agreement anywhere. Now at least you can elevate it based on what people said. This isn't making people wrong. This is saying, how are we going to work together? This is how you build trust, is you start working together on agreements you've made. And it's a very important, different approach. It may seem obvious that, oh, this is how we do things, but actually it's not how we do things, especially in the agile space. If you look at the 2 most popular frameworks we have, Scrum and SAFe, you'll see that they're all based on these little things put together. Scrum talks about, I got the product owner, I got the Scrum master, I got the team, and it sounds great, except now I've got this Scrum team that's kind of isolated from the rest of the world. And maybe I got 2 or 3 teams. And maybe I'll go to Scrum at scale and I'm combining all these teams together to work together. But notice this is kind of a bottom-up or team approach that I'm combining the pieces. I'm not looking at the whole. They can say, oh, but SAFe's got everything. So aren't they doing it differently? And the answer is no. They look at it maybe bigger, but they're starting with what's called essential SAFe. I'm looking at all the team level, and then I'll add product management, and then I'll add portfolio management. So you're taking things and you're putting them together. I'm suggesting you take a different approach. You look at this, what's called the value stream. How does the work get across? And you don't start at the top. You don't start at the bottom. You think of the value stream as an entire entity. And you maybe start this product and service or this product and service. It's a different perspective and it's very important. Okay. Now, what's another piece of Agile? And this is starting to come into a little bit more awareness, but it's very important to talk about it. So I am. And what this is we want to provide value to the customer by improving their experience. So we often talk about building our system. Okay. Like our services, this could be called our value stream. If you're building software, then you have a development value stream. In other words, your developers and all that are building something and it creates our computer system or whatever it is that people interact with. And the customer's operational value stream, in other words, how they get their work done. Like imagine our system here is takes orders of pizza or something. And then this is how they go about getting on our system. Hey, I'm getting on the system now. Hey, kids, what pizza do you want? Oh, here, I'm going to order this. Hey, honey, what pizza do you want? And they have their own value stream. their operational value stream, as it's called, and it interacts with our system as we get on, click in what I want, what my address is, how I pay for it. Now, this is what's called the customer journey. In other words, how does the customer's experience interact with our computer system? And there's a huge opportunity here that many people aren't aware of. People are starting to talk about the customer journey, and that's awesome. But I've actually see there's another possibility. In other words, how do you unwind this entire value stream that people are going through? And some people say, well, you can't because you don't control the customer over here. But I would suggest that attending to the customer journey is a way to change or influence the customer's operating value stream. And that's not the fridge I have, but I have a fridge kind of like that. And this is door and door. It's a new example. It's just really easy. Most everybody can relate to refrigerators. So normally the customer journey, when you get something out of refrigerators, you open the whole door and everything, all the cold air comes out and you look and rummage through the door, the refrigerator. But when you change the product to have a door within a door, this one's kind of interesting. See, I can pull this door open and I see this stuff. Usually it's kept closed. This is just for for display. So imagine this door is closed, but I pull this one. I keep drinks that I get all the time. It gets so much easier now. I just pull this door open. I get the drink out I want. I save energy, and it's easier because I don't have to rummage through things, and I've got all this drink display. So by having a different system, you can literally change the customer's operational value stream. This is very important because if you're talking about strategies, this should be to help the customer or your own internal process. Now we can actually influence them. And this can set a big difference between you and others. Unique selling proposition, because most people aren't attending to the customer journey or the operational value stream of the customer. They're attending to the system. And if you look at the real breakthrough products, you see the real breakthroughs aren't in the system. Apple's a great example. It's how do people now listen to music? How do people do different things? So when you start attending to the value stream, it not only helps you build things better, it not only helps you design your thing better, it helps you develop better products for the customer. This is very important. Okay, how do we do this? It sounds great, Al, but how do you do it? Well, the first thing is you got to undertake systems thinking. Look at the whole, see the relationships between the groups, see the relationships with the customer, as we just did. Systems thinking was looking at our system that we're building, how we build it, the customer journey, and the customer. It's a little involved, obviously, but it can be done. Okay, systems are not collections of the pieces. They're defined by the relationships between the pieces. Russ Akoff, who's he passed away, but one of the best system thinkers around, talked about if you took the best parts of the best cars and put them together, you have a pile of junk. It's how it works together. You can ask yourself what parts of an airplane are responsible for flight. Is it the wings? Is it the body? Is it the engine? And you realize, well, if I don't all work together, you don't get off the ground. Is the landing gear? So this brings an interesting question, and we want to actually ask this as a real question here. What parts of your organization add value? Because it sounds like they all should, but I'll bet you they all don't. So Gareth, did we want to have a little conversation here, or just give a reflection?
So perhaps if everyone can just throw on the chat channel, in your organization, where is principally the value coming from? Who creates the value in your organization? So if you just
who is not creating the value in your organization? Because in many companies, HR and legal are actually an impediment to value.
Okay. Thank you, Cassandra. She says our consultants at Assurity, of course. Jim says empowered product teams. Who else? Frontline staff, Alan. Yeah, the people customer facing. The squads themselves, Bhargavi. In the energy company that you work at, product teams, Charlene in Freedom, the builders, the people creating the value itself, the engineers create the value, the technology engineering. Yeah, and I've got a background in engineering, and I was always, with my biased view, always told that the engineers are the people creating the value. So those who articulate what value is in our context, Todd from Sky City. John, the product line management, and the engineers, Simon. Yeah. So what do you think, Al?
Well, see, there's a side to this which is very important. So Steve Denning wrote a book called The Age of Agile, and he talks about how the essence of Agile is the tight coordination of the development teams, with the customer and how everybody ought to be adding value to that. And when you start thinking about it, I mean, legal, HR, other people, they have their responsibilities, but if they're not setting themselves up to add value to the customer, there's something wrong. So everybody should be aligning around this, and you can look and make decisions this way. Are we actually, is this group actually adding value? So it's a good question to actually ask and make sure we're attending to things, and it creates a context for how we work together. And that's really one of the important things I'm trying to get. Okay, now besides systems thinking, I've laid out this value stream and I've talked about different ways to do things. Well, you don't have to reinvent everything. This is important. Actually, I mentioned patterns. The patterns book I wrote was technical patterns, writing software and things, but actually they're very generic. There is this notion of patterns are solutions to recurring problems in a context. Now, when Agile started around, I know the Agile Manifesto was in 2001, but there were a whole slew of us doing it in 99 with XP, even Scrum existed. That existed a little before. There wasn't a lot known back then. I mean, we were doing some pretty good stuff, but it wasn't known like it is now. But nowadays, there are like so many solutions out there. Disciplined Agile, for example, has a tool that has a catalog of, I don't know how many, but it must be hundreds of different solutions to recurring problems. And you can figure these out a lot yourself. So the point is, what we want to do is take advantage of known pieces, but just put them together in a way that works for us. Okay, so this is where we use patterns of success and challenge. We want to make practices that are fit for purpose. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we want to find something that works for us. It's like having a catalog that you pull from and make it all work, okay? And then the last piece, actually there's a little more, but another significant piece is we want to take advantage of flow, lean theory of constraints, because sometimes the practices that we have at our hands don't fit quite well. But if we know flow, lean theory of constraints, we can either kind of take two things that each don't fit perfectly, but create a third one that does, or pretty close, or even do deductive reasoning, create a new one. Now, maybe this isn't for beginners, but I'll tell you, it's not always just for beginners. Once you understand this, you say, well, we're looking at the whole, we're looking at patterns to give us a good starting point, and then I can adjust according to the rules of what I call the laws of natural development, of product development. Okay. Now, there are some core practices we better attend to. We got to organize around the value stream. Why? Because it's the delays in the value stream that are really causing us problems. So we have to see it. There's this concept, I'll talk about this in just a couple of minutes, called the idealized value stream. What should we be striving for? How do we create tension from where we are to where we want to go? I've already talked about this. Our operational value stream, the customer journey, the customer's operational value stream, their journey, and our development value stream. How do they relate to each other? We want to create a tailored backlog, a tailored improvement backlog that'll get us from where we are to where we want to go. And I mentioned business increments. We want to use these. And there's some other things. I'm not going to go into focused solution teams, but it's the idea, other than this quick definition, it's the idea of maybe I got 15, 20 people I need that are only going to work on this solution. Those of you who are familiar with SAFe, they're not trains. Trains are too big. Trains typically have lots of products being built. I'm talking one product being built by anywhere from 8 to 20, 30 people. Many companies that are several hundred people could be organized this way, and it's very important. So the actions to take, well, we got to consider our vision. We want to align teams with the work. In other words, I've got a stakeholder here who's telling us to do stuff. I don't want it to go to 50 different people scattered part-time. That causes delays. Imagine people talk about multitasking, but the real problem with multitasking is not just that it drives people nuts and loses 10 or 20% of their productivity. It causes delays in the workflow because they go from one thing and then that stops because they go to somewhere else, and that creates additional work. So we want to put our work in the context of strategies, stop thinking about one-off projects to we're going to have a series of enhancements to existing products and services. Again, we create an improvement backlog where maybe we jump to the end state, maybe we go there step by step. That depends upon the company involved. It's ironic, Agile is supposed to be about people, but it ignores this issue that some companies like change, some companies don't. How do you adjust? Always doing little bits can be very disconcerting for people who like to say, oh, that's what we should do, let's just jump to it. But just jumping to it could be disconcerting for companies that like to do small change. I should say work on and manage the improvement backlog. Okay, so what we need is to create this improvement by looking at what's needed, where you are, again, put the work in the context of the strategies. We make decisions based on what we're trying to do. And you need to enable teams to be working as efficiently as possible while attending to the whole. This is the key thing. You don't work in isolation. They have to be looking at adding value to the customer. Okay, and you manage this improvement backlog. Okay, now the idealized value stream, and this isn't necessarily it, but it's this concept. Value stream mapping has gotten to be in vogue. And I started doing value stream mapping a lot. I think it was around 2005, 2006, when I first started teaching lean software. And it's amazing. And the potential is amazing because every now and then, people are solving the problem in the wrong area. They think there's a problem in one area when they really, that's where it's showing up. That's not what the problem is. In fact, I wrote an article, and I can give some follow-up things. Back in 2006, 2007, I worked with a development group of about 100 people where everybody was sure in the company that the problem was with the developers, because about 5% of the time they had these web services that they were providing, these new websites, were blowing up. And what happened is then the main lead would have to go back to the client and fix it and all that. Besides the reputation, they figured it was costing them 20% of their work, because even though it happened only 5% of the time, it caused the lead and it was impacting everything else. And the way I knew that they thought it was the development group, well, first of all, they told me that, but the two people who came there was the project managers that were there, and the other one was the development manager, basically the CEO, not CEO, CTO of what they were doing. Well, it turns out that wasn't where the problem was at all. The problem was the way they were setting things up with the customer in the first place. Had to do with sales. And it took about 2 hours to fix this. And they got a 20% improvement because all these problems just went away with about 2 hours of work. This convinced me value stream mapping was really cool. The problem is it gets harder and harder to do value stream mappings as companies get bigger and bigger. And what I realized, it took me a while to do this. I mean, that was back in 2007. Value stream mapping worked great for about 5-6 years. Then I started noticing that people weren't investing in it properly. And they'd also assume, oh, we're doing agile here, no delays, which wasn't true. And I came up with this idea about 4 or 5 years ago called the idealized value stream. And it turns out that it's like a Pareto. It doesn't get you a full mapping, but it gets you enough to see where your problems are. And you could lay it out, and this is what we do as part of the analysis. You lay out, well, here's where you want to be. Now, in this case, notice I have the executives in the portfolio, but I have separate teams. Like this is maybe a focused solution team. This is another one. So I cut out the delays because they don't have silos anymore. These guys are all takes, and they go out and get out the door. What's key here, this is like where we could go. And now you can do an analysis. Well, that's where we want to be, but here's where we are. Well, how do we create a step-by-step approach? That's basically what this is a target, but then we can now create this backlog I've mentioned a couple times. This enables us to untangle the streams. Do we do it all at once? Do we do it in stages? Again, that's part of the process that we can teach. Okay, this is really the last slide of the presentation, so I'm not too bad, a little bit behind, because we started 10 minutes late. Or not 10 minutes late, there was that 10-minute prefix. I want to talk a little bit about the role of management in all this, because management was originally ignored by the Agile Manifesto. You look for the word, you won't find it. It's not even mentioned once. Customers are mentioned a few times, like 2 or 3 times, not a lot. Business is mentioned once or twice. Surprisingly, the development team, developers are mentioned 19 times. And it's not maybe that surprising. The Agile Manifesto, well, actually, it's the Manifesto for Agile Software Development, gives you a clue right there. If it's about software development, it's going to be about the developers. Was written mostly, not completely. I know a few people who are, I would say, more well-rounded, but mostly written by people who are doing XP or Scrum, which are team approaches. So it's kind of, in my mind, a little old. Management's role is very important, and there are different levels with different importance. Executives, and I should have said executives, directors, your general manager. Executives are like, how do I get the vision? Here's where we're going. Make that clear. That's their role, is how do I create the vision and clarity, and not inspire people. That's hard to do, but you can give them something that they can inspire themselves to align with. Okay, portfolio, what are the specifics, not just the vision? Product, what are the things we're going to build? Development managers, how do I not tell people how to do, but how can I give them the environment within which they can get their job done? This is the new role of management. This is, by the way, an old concept. Lean's been doing this for decades, actually half a century. The idea of a manager is not to tell people how to work, but to provide an environment within which they can get their job done. So they have to listen, but they're not totally just listening. They have to look at the bigger picture, which teams typically don't. It again creates the context for the teams to work. And then you need to manage the transition and the transformation. It typically does not happen on its own. Okay, so I'm going to hand this back to somebody. I think, Brendan, is that you?
It's so Al, I've got a few questions that.
Oh yeah, then let's go for that.
So the first thing is about value stream mapping, and it's an approach I've taken quite a lot because of my background in manufacturing. And there was an example at Freedom where they asked me to review the SDLC, and what they meant by that was to improve the efficiency of the Scrum teams. And I said, well, actually, we need to look at that entire value stream, the whole end to end. So what we did is we went into a series of value stream mapping workshops. I think a few people on the call were involved in this. But before we knew it, it became bigger than Ben-Hur, because we had, like, I think 7 or 8 workshops of a few hours a time with everybody in the entire organization. And we had a huge whiteboard with more Post-it notes than you could possibly count. And it became so unwieldy, and there were so many different types of value streams that we were limited in what we could gather from it. And then you've talked about the idealized value stream. So I'd like to explore more what the true value of an idealized value stream and how it relates to the improvement backlog.
Yeah, I'll explain this in a story because it doesn't. I won't say it's intuitive, but it's one of these things. I love Einstein's quote: "Science describes what's already been or known. Engineering talks about what will be." And I did this in an engineering thing. So I was doing value stream mapping from around 2000 intensely. I mean, by 2007, it was like, man, I'm not going to talk to a client unless I map the value stream, because I found if I didn't do that, I couldn't understand what was going on. So I did that for about 5 years. I mean, every engagement was I'm talking, do the mapping, and then I could see how things interacted. And I understood what the problem is, and that worked great for about 5 or 6 years. But what happened is, as I would get into bigger and bigger companies, what I would have is some people that were involved in this value stream and some people that were involved in that value stream. And typically the teams didn't show up. So I had directors to talk to, but they didn't really know what's going on with their teams. They thought they did, but when I would talk to the teams, it was like, oh, they don't really see what's going on. Or they may not have said that, but I could tell by the diversity of the difference between the two. So value stream mapping is awesome. It's great. But what I realized was there were these patterns of success and challenge. So you didn't really need to map everything out. You just had to see what are the 3 or 4 dozen things that should be done in an organization. This is something just by working with hundreds of companies or talking to consultants, adding up to hundreds of things. What I realized was that most companies there's a core of stuff that most companies have to deal with. Like, how do I decide my portfolio? How do I decide what's more important? How do I create an intake process so it can get to development? How do I align teams? I mean, there are like 30 to 40 things that everybody has to do. Now, if you're under FDA, American thing, Federal Drug Administration, if you're under, if you have to be regulated for whatever reason, financial or pharmaceutical or whatever, you got those additional constraints. There are additional things you need to do. But there are about 3 dozen things that you have to do pretty much if you're building a product, service, whether it's software or not. They vary a little bit, software or not, or if you have other hardware. So what I did is I started saying, well, gee, instead of mapping the value stream, what if I just look if these 30 or 40 things are being done? And would I be able to ask people that? So what I came up with was I said, well, let's just lay out what a value stream where you do these 30 or 40 things looks like. And that's the idealized value stream. And it's not exactly the same for every company, but it's surprisingly similar. And then it was like, okay, well, that's great, but will customers get this? I had that, I admit I wasn't that sure. So about 5 years ago, I think I was at a conference in San Diego, an open space, and I just decided, well, let's try it. Let's just give it a shot. And I remember in this open space, I told them, hey, here's what I'm going to do. I don't know if it's valuable or not, but we're going to see. And I laid out basically the idealized value stream. And I said, step by step, this is what happens. And people understood that this is what they needed. They understood where they weren't doing it. Like if we say oh, you should have a team that's capable of getting the job done. Say, we don't, we just collect people and do it. Well, that's a problem, right? Said, yeah, we get that. So the idealized value stream is like a Pareto analysis of how are you doing with these 3 or 4 dozen things, and how does it fit in the value stream, and how do the things relate to each other? Remember the systems thinking I was talking about. How does this relate to that? You all see it in the workflow. You see that people are busy, but the work isn't. And that's basically what the idealized value stream is. And it's a very, very essential technique, and it's taken a while to write up and give you graphs to do to start with. But that's the essence of it. Then what happens is sometimes in an idealized value stream, you'll find, well, we're really not sure what's going on there. Okay, now do regular value stream mapping in that one small section. But I almost never have to do that. The 80% I get from 20% of the work is usually good enough. Now, I don't know if I went too long in that story, if I even answered your question. So follow if I didn't.
I think you did. I mean, the essence I take from that is it's the 80-20 rule, the Pareto rule, is that most organizations, and I've had this experience, most organizations have similar problems, even if they've got unique contexts.
That's right.
And this leads on to,
that's the thing. The objectives are the same, even if they implement them differently. And what's nice is you can do this. There's usually, when I've done this, when I go in using this technique, I usually do some preliminary analysis so I know the team's involved. And then you get this huge whiteboard, or now we can use a mural board or something like that, and you just walk through it. And people have good conversations, and people discover, oh, I didn't know you were having that problem. So it's another alignment technique.
So another thing you mentioned, Al, was is that we have to shift our thinking from either top down or bottom up. So, you know, Scrum teams very much a team centric, and you try and scale out, and you sometimes hit barriers. Or with a safe implementation, it's often I've seen it start at a portfolio program level. And I'm guessing most people on this call will be in one of those two contexts. So let's say I'm an organization who's adopted SAFe. How could I apply this thinking that we're talking about, and how would I go from here?
Yeah, well, SAFe has a lot to offer. I mean, it's, you know, a lot of people who don't like SAFe. And I mean, I used to be a gold partner. I was a contributor. I was even an SPC trainer. I left SAFe about, I don't know, 7 years ago, because in my mind, it left out a few key things, and is by its nature getting a little unwieldy and missing a few things. But SAFe does a lot of right stuff. I mean, it looks at teams, across teams. You can get started with SAFe easy. I mean, Essential SAFe does a lot of right stuff. It doesn't have how do you break a train down, though, to have smaller focused solution teams. It doesn't have the concept of the MBI. In fact, they've kind of destroyed the concept of the MVP by using it for everything. And they're trying to use MMFs and the lean UX. Read lean UX. I don't talk about MMFs. And in fact, when you read what an MMF is in SAFe, it's not at all what Denny and Cleland Wang wrote in the Software by Numbers, which is where the term comes from. But that being said, there's a lot of really good stuff in SAFe. And what you want to start with is how do these teams use product management strategies and get things together. The first thing you do in SAFe, though, is introduce the value stream. Now, they mention it, but you can't see it unless you know what a value stream is. So the first thing I do is I actually relate SAFe into a value stream map, and then I actually reorganize the big picture so you can see it not from how do all the pieces interact. Remember, it's not the parts of the car, it's the car. It's not the parts of the airplane, it's the airplane. So the first thing is relate SAFe as a value stream management system, which SAFe doesn't do, but you can think about it that way. So that's the first thing I do. And then I add things like minimum business increments, add things like focused solution teams, add things like easier ways of doing management. And then that top level stuff, the portfolio and large enterprise, that's very complicated and very complex, which everybody needs. You need portfolio management of a group of 3. I mean, it's essential. So what you do, though, when you add these concepts that I just mentioned and you make the shift to thinking across the value stream, you don't need that complexity up at the top. So it's like rethink the value stream, add 2 or 3 concepts, and then don't do the heavy top stuff, but use these new concepts to take where you are and go forward. So take advantage of what you've learned. There's a lot of good stuff there. But once you get past the essential SAFe, it gets to be heavy burden because they don't give you the value stream management piece. You have hundreds of pieces interacting instead of, hey, I've got this flow. So that's the biggest thing. And I will say this because I see Aldo's question in the questions. What's the biggest shift? I think the biggest shift is to systems thinking and then doing that within the value stream. And the reason I say that's hard, conceptually, it's not hard at all. But gee, I can tell you conceptually how to diet and exercise, and that's not hard. Will you do it? Well, maybe not. So I don't care what's conceptually easy to understand. I care what can you do. And most organizations are designed around local optimization. Most organizations are about, is this team meeting its goal? Is this manager getting what they want? See, it's not just shifting the mindset. You have to make it that it's a holistic. This goes back to that Deming quote at the beginning. Systems have to be managed. That's the toughest thing. The beauty, however, is if you look at lean and flow, there's a huge amount of evidence, a huge amount of tools that keep reminding people. Remember, the other thing is it value consumed by the customer? So if I'm a developer, I can't say, well, I wrote the code, testers have to do it. No. I don't care about your writing code. Hey, your job ain't writing code. By the way, the tester's job ain't testing. Both of your job is adding value to the customer. How do you do that? It shifts this conversation. And then when you start saying, hey, HR, you're rewarding these people for being fast. They're busy, they're great, but they're slowing everybody else down. Oh, and HR says, yeah, but our job is to help people add value to the customer. We need to change our HR so people can add value to the customer. So it's kind of interesting. This is the hardest thing to change. Well, one thing, here's a book recommendation. Sounds like it has nothing to do with this, but it does. It shifted my whole thinking. And I can't remember whether it was Horia, Gareth, or Aldo who recommended it, but it was The Obstacle is the Way, Ryan Holiday. I tell you, I have not thought the same since I read this book. Because what I just mentioned as the toughest thing is it's not the toughest thing like, oh, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger, overcome pain and all that. It's like, you got to look at this issue head on, solving this issue of how you work together. When you realize that's the path, then you all of a sudden shift everything else. You can't set it aside. You use this difficult problem as the way to move forward. And that's where it's good to have outside consultants. I'm not trying to sell Assurity on y'all. I mean, good that, we are working together, but sometimes this needs to be somebody who steps outside and can see the big picture and is helping you along. And that's one of the values. It's not just that they might bring information. It's we can disengage from the client and then teach you how to do it as well. Okay, long answer, but that's a key question.
Thank you, Al. Now, I'm wondering if people have some additional questions. Feel free to add them to the Q&A. Horia, perhaps you could take over here. I can see there's a question from Jim in the question there. If you could paraphrase that.
Right. So Jim says that if we attend to the value stream and organize the way the sausage is made around it, shouldn't we be able to create an intake process that simply prioritizes initiatives and teams and can pull those into their particular value stream as capacity frees up, rather than the typical push model that's currently occurring in portfolio planning?
Thank you, Jim, for asking that, because I should have really mentioned this shift between pull and push. So this is a big thing in Agile. It's been in Agile from the beginning, and it also comes as part of the theory constraints, flow, and lean. So a push model it's like, well, we figured out what needs to happen, and we're managers and we're smart and we know what these guys take, and we push it on the team. Hey, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, and you're going to meet these dates. A pull model works differently, because this is this question of how do you manage between these silos or these different steps. Pull says, I don't pull anything until I'm done with what I'm working on, because if I pull something while I'm working on something more important, I'm slowing down the more important by adding this new thing. Now, it's maybe not worded so well, so let me restate it. If you have up at the front, this, then this, then this, then this, and I've got them sequenced. I prefer the word sequence to prioritization, because everything's important. I can have a company, they tell me, oh, we got 100 high priority things. I said, well, you can't do everything at once. So they go back and they reprioritize. Yeah, you're right. We had 98 A's and 2 B's. Okay, no, it doesn't work that way. This is first, then this is next, then this is next. What happens is you start realizing that if I start the most important thing, and then I start doing another thing, at some point, the third or fourth or whatever it is going to slow down more important things. And now this goes back to that Reinertsen quote early. The waste isn't that I got some people who aren't working. The waste is that the workflow is waiting. So what I don't want to do is slow down something that's very important for something that's less important, just so I can keep people busy. And you have to start looking at that. And if you are always keeping people don't have work to do, then you've not managed the skill set and the needs well. But maybe that's the time to do other things. Maybe that's where cross-functional training comes in. So I've never seen a company that doesn't have something for people to do. What you focus on is getting the work that's most important done first. People pull it when they're ready. It doesn't get pushed to them. And then all this waste of the work waiting. See, there's waste when work wait. There's not a lot of waste when people wait. When people wait, you might lose 20% of the capacity, but when work waits, it creates additional work. My experience is most companies are about 60 to 80% of the work they do is work that never should have been done. And it's not just because we discovered something, it's we discovered it late or we created additional work. So pull is essential.
Okay, what other questions do we have here? I don't see much has come through. We've added the link to the Ryan Holiday book, The Obstacle.
Oh, good. Highly recommended, yeah.
And you also recommended Eli Goldratt's The Goal, and his
actually, The Goal has been read by a lot of people, and I would not, The Goal is brilliant. I mean, totally brilliant. But I'll tell you a book that I think is more important is The Choice. He wrote this in 2009. And in The Choice, Goldratt presents a theory that, by the way, is part of the systems we use, but it's the best book on critical thinking in my mind is The Choice, written in 2009. And what Goldratt talks about is that, yeah, systems look complex, but if you start looking at them like they're really complex, you get scared and you don't think there are solutions, and you turn yourself into ineffective blubber in a sense because you don't know there's solutions. So what he suggests is this thing he calls inherent simplicity. He says the world is actually simpler than it looks, and it's in harmony with itself. And that if you take this approach, then you start seeing things. And I'll mention some of the ones. I've said a lot of these. I just haven't put it together in this talk. I have a lot of articles on this, by the way, and it's the core way we do the improvement backlog. You look at how big are your items. Are they of high value? Remember MBIs? Small, high value. You look at the workload. Are we overloading people? That's the third. Is work visible? Is the workflow visible? So there are about 9 of these, I think, that it presents you a way to look into a complex system. Doesn't give you predictability, but the idea is that if I can manage the somewhat complicated, this affects that, that affects whatever, then the general complexity goes down. So The Choice is the underlying philosophy, or you can read about a 6-page article I wrote on this. But I love The Choice because I think Goldratt lays out what critical thinking is in this book. And what you'll see in the agile space, there's not much critical thinking. There's just a lot of, oh, you do this, and then they just assume it's right, and there's no questioning of it. So yeah, The Obstacle's the Way, The Choice, and a third book, which I've alluded to, I've not mentioned it, but if you want to really get into the design process of how things are created, this is my only book that's in my top 5 personal books and top 5 technical books. My wife, who is not technical at all, okay? I mean, we've been together 34 years, and we used to be called the high touch, high tech. She was the high touch, ex-massage therapist, psychologist, school counselor. I'm techie. We've gotten a lot alike in some ways, which is probably better that I've gotten more like her, not so much she's gotten more like me. But anyway, the book is called Timeless Way of Building. And in the Timeless Way of Building, built by a building architect, he talks about how you look at things so what you're trying to accomplish comes to life. In his case, it was architecture. And Timeless Way of Building is a big shift in how to design things. It's not the pieces put together. It's how did the whole get broken down and looked at. Like I got a plane. Well, instead of putting all the pieces together, I look at the different aspects of the plane and think of it now holistically. That's a very interesting book. You won't find anything of absolute practicality in it, but you'll find a new way of thinking in it. And it had a huge impact on me when I read it about 25 years ago. I designed differently since that point.
Thank you, Al. So I notice it's just 25 past the hour here now. So perhaps we could go back to the slide deck and the last few slides. And Brendan, it will be over to you, please.
Oh, so I should get out of this.
Oh, it's fine. I'll keep it. Don't need to put it on. It's all good.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, everyone. Hey, I just want to say on behalf of everyone, Al and Gareth, thank you very much for this most insightful conversation this morning. both in terms of your thinking around the topic in terms of strategy to execution, but also I've got to say the great Amazon book reviews that we're able to do along the way as well. There's going to be a lot of Christmas reading that's done as a result of this. So thank you very much for that. To everyone else, I trust you found this useful. I'm sure you did. And I hope you had a chance to ask questions and have them answered. If you didn't, or if you think of any questions afterwards, please feel free to reach out to Gareth or to Al or to any of us, and we can have a subsequent follow-up conversation. As we mentioned at the start, we will be sending out a link to today's session, so you can look at that again. Please feel free to share that if you like. And also, we'll just send out a post-event survey as well, because what we're trying to do and have a real ambition to do is have more of these sessions next year with speakers like Al. We'll no doubt be using Al again and other international speakers as well over the course of the next 12 months. There was one slide that Al brought up at the start before we, at the finish, before we got onto it, was just a brief overview of Assurity's offerings around the education. So just so clear, so Assurity can help you in a couple of ways. So one is access to the skilled consultants such as Gareth and Al, helping you, optimize your value streams and helping you work better. So from a consultant perspective, but also have a very good and established education business around a range of subjects. Including Scrum, SAFe. Hopefully, Al didn't put you off SAFe completely, but we can help you with that as well. So on that note, I just want to say thank you very much to everyone. We trust you enjoy it. Please give us feedback so we can do these better in the future. And have a great day. And thank you again, Al.
You're right. Well, I enjoyed this. And yeah, not to put you off SAFe. If you've been doing SAFe, these ideas can be laid on top of it and can help you with that as well. So it's not something to avoid.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.